that you keep moving amongst us and the new lessons we learned and how fired up everybody is, Lord. And I could kind of tell that they almost don't even have that natural sleepiness that kind of comes at the end of the week because they're pumped about what you were doing in the services, and people are talking about those things still, Lord, even when we wake up and stuff. And when they all came home last night, a lot of cool statements were coming out of my kids again and stuff like that. So I just thank you for all you're doing in our midst. It really does help to have your instruction, your spirit who instructs us. I thank you for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So, in the midst of my last bit of my study at this waiting school, I was looking at kind of the group called the Holiness Association. I was trying to find some things out about their history to see if they stuck to their guns. And instead, I kind of given this dissertation intro. I can't read any more of it. I finally finished the little bit I could. I read the 24 pages that it gave me, but that's all it gave me. And so I didn't get to get into the meat of it, which I really wish I could. And I found out this author has 3 books. His name's Kenneth O. Brown. Watch out for all the different, if you get the initials wrong, you're going to get them the wrong Kenneth. But this guy is Kenneth O. Brown. And if you look up, he likes to research on camp meetings, which is really interesting. And so when I did that, I ended up in the Guide to Holiness. And if you guys are familiar, I can actually bring in the Guide to Holiness. I don't have all of them. I have one that was given to us when we were in Maine. It was given to my mom. And so who's in charge of the Guide to Holiness, the publication for the early American holiness movement, especially through sources like Phoebe Palmer? It's Phoebe Palmer and her husband. And so as a result of kind of looking at that, I was looking at some of the things in it this morning. I saw, I only read one of their testimonies, and it was about a young, well, I don't know how old he is. I can't tell from the article. But he's an evangelist, and he was called to ministry. And he knew he was called into ministry, and he became a Christian years prior to this. And as he started to go into the church, he went into evangelism as a born-again Christian. Now, he knew his heart was not pure, okay? And so he would get up and he would preach on holiness, and he would open the altar, and he would feel convicted because it was kind of like, you know, he wasn't exactly like walking behind light or being a hypocrite, but when you're preaching to everybody else what you don't have, you know, it makes you feel short spiritually and kind of out of the spirit, or at least confused. And so he kept talking about that. Well, then he said, you know, the real thing that was going on in his heart was that he was wrestling. He was, some people say wrestling, whatever way you want to say it. He was wrestling with his call. So he's doing his call to evangelism, but he's mad about it. Because deep down within, he loved the idea of being like a boat captain. And he wanted to, I mean, this is in the Guide to Holiness. This is in 1860s, you know, way back in the early American holiness movement period. And so he said, the truth is, I would go out and I'd hold revivals, but I really wanted to, I would dream all the time or think all the time about how I wanted to pull aside and, you know, maybe hold a meeting too close to a shoreline where there would be, you know, boats, and then I could get what I wanted and I could become what I want to be, you know. And so he said one day that finally the conviction got to him bad, that he wasn't sanctified, you know. And so he started wrestling with God, and God showed him his heart, and he said, you know, the truth is you got something that's holding you back. You could be everything that you want to be for Christ. The reason you're not is because deep down within you made a, you know, commitment that you really want this. And if you had 100% committed to your call, do you see what I'm saying? He said you would be holy already, and you'd have this impact that you're trying to have. And so this evangelist, I'm assuming he's young. I don't really know. I can't tell from the article. He says, so right there he wrestled with God. You know, it wasn't easy. And he was able to surrender that whole problem to God. And so the minute he did, you know, God broke free in his life. And so, yeah, you know, here I am this morning. I'm spending time like that, reading articles from the early Guide to Holiness. The one I'm looking for, I can't find. The one I need is from like 1967. So I'm 6 years before that. I'm in the wrong Guide to Holiness, you know. And the reason I wanted that was this. I found this week when I was looking for other things about the faithfulness of the National Holiness Association. So on page 116, I had to write these down so I wouldn't mess it up. Brad and I have been looking for a few years. I had somebody misrepresent Phoebe Palmer to me, and I know this whole theme this week. I was thinking about this last night. I don't know about you guys, but what happens for me is Thursday I don't do anything because I like to sing, but we have too many singers, so I don't really do anything on Thursday. I come in here and I sometimes have a book back there, and then Friday I don't do anything. I just come here and I do the intro prayer, and both times I do the intro prayer if that counts, and then Mom teaches that night. Okay, so I still don't do anything, and then Saturday is really hard because Saturday morning I'm the early guy. It used to be Peter Lundell. And, so only a few people come in and and one time he taught us against pop. He didn't want us drinking pop. And I was like, man, we need pop. We can't even come in here and stay awake. You know what I'm saying? You're taking away the only power we have. So anyway, I told some people that me and James went in the back of his session with a pop and drank away. Anyway, we should have done that. But that was James' influence on me, like usual. And he's drinking a pop right now. I just want to make him feel so. No, I'm just kidding. He's not. He can't drink pop. Yeah, no. Well, that's just as bad. Anyway, so Saturday is kind of cool though, because it's that day where God does good stuff. But if I stir up the devil during waiting school in the Saturday morning session, I get beat up in the afternoon to mid-afternoon to evening. It's guaranteed every single time. Okay, so one waiting school, we had a fellow come in that he grew up around my sister, and he was tall. I mean, he went from last time I remember him, he was real skinny and real short like this. Now he's like this tall. He's up here with me. And he came in and he was listening to our teachings, but God fell and helped me in the first session. And I could feel it. And he could feel it. I could see it on his face. He was smiling. But we had a couple go-getters in our group that were just a little bit too bright-eyed, and, they wanted to get him changed right away. And so one of them tried to hook him during lunch, and I didn't know anything about that. And so when he came back by the second session, he was mad. Really mad, like so mad we never saw him again after this venture. See what I'm saying? And so this is a kind of typical pattern where I go through my second session, and then I break my fast. That's a stupid thing. I told my family last night when we were eating tacos, I said, if anybody offers me food at waiting school again, I'm going to hit him in the head with it. Because the minute I get rid of that, it's just like, the little Satans come out, and everything comes out and starts bugging me. And so anyway. So I think that's kind of hard. It's you get these tough experiences, for trying to stick with it. And I mean, it's weird. Some waiting school, I mean, we've been through 56 waiting schools. So some waiting schools, they get up and, I'm one of 3 teachers, and they'll be like, Elaine, you really helped me, and so you really, and I'm always left out. You know what I mean? And it's okay, you know what I mean? But you get what I'm saying? I mean, this is the type of thing. It's just like, right when I get done, I walk out, your pie, sir. Just right in the face. And see what I mean? The enemy just does that. But I know that it counts, all right? And so what I'm looking at here is Phoebe Palmer, all right? And if you don't know who Phoebe Palmer is, she's the start of the American Holiness Movement. I don't think anything would have happened without Sarah Langford and her sister and her starting a holiness meeting on Tuesdays for the promotion of holiness, okay? And, what we did a study on this, but you could see how far it went, kind of. What I'm usually faithful to do is I'm usually faithful to take out a highlighter and I highlight the book where I've read, so you'll know if I read it, because it'll have this yellow mark all the way down, kind of like my front teeth. No, I'm just kidding. But so I didn't do that on this one, but I have highlighting all the way to halfway through it. See what I mean? So we only did the study to the part I liked, but then I knew that this author was going to change tracks, okay? And so the reason I brought up that negative stuff is because, the enemy tried to pick on me last night when I lost my superpower. When I stopped fasting, and you see what I mean? He tried to come in and say, well, you just sound like a conspiracy guy. Everybody's out to get you. You see, I mean, he teased, everybody's lying to you. And that's been the theme this waiting school. Well, I do think they are. I think they're misrepresenting things, okay? And I don't think I'm being crazy to say that. And especially poor Phoebe Palmer. I mean, I think her influence is amazing. I think what she did changed the whole world, And so one of the lies that they present about her is they say when it comes to end times, they try to steal her. They try to put her in their camp. They try to say she's a post-millennialist. In other words, she doesn't care about end times. And, all figurative stuff. It's not real, okay? And so there's no chronology. There's no Antichrist. You get what I mean? It's just all figures. And she mainly believes in some revival that she's having. And then she just kind of died, and that's all end times meant to her. And I knew differently. I don't know how. I mean, I haven't read enough of her writings. I've read The Way of Holiness. That's her most famous book. Um, now, this guy is a big author, and I don't know. This is what he looks like, okay? I want you to see a picture. That's at least back when he wrote this book, that's what he looked like. All right, his name is Charles Edward White, and he wrote on her. Now, listen to the title. It sounds a little weird. Phoebe Palmer as theologian, revivalist, feminist, and humanitarian. She did write a book. I was hoping it was on end times. It's using the phrase from Pentecost that says, "In the last days, I'll pour out my spirit on both men and women." So it is a woman's defense, okay? He's calling that feminist. Feminism today is a totally different thing than just standing up for women's right to preach, okay? It's a nut group of people that have gone extreme, to say the least, and they're usually in the leftist core. Do you get what I'm saying? And so, and they stand up for everything wrong. So I think it implies something that's not true. What I'm shocked by is this book is kind of seems a little ahead of its time as far as scholarship. 1986. He wrote this in 1986, and I didn't know that they were aware of so many of the arguments that have been presented today, okay, back then. And he is. So the problem I had, and the reason I stopped our study, was because when he's in Phoebe Palmer's life, they get to this thing. She has some famous parts. Have you guys ever heard of her altar theology? They usually summarize it in 3 steps. The funny thing is, I've read all about it, but I've never found it in her writings. Okay, that's just the truth. I don't know why they say it all the time, but they say it's out there. I just never run into it yet. Okay, I've read 2 of her books through. I've studied her for quite a few years. I've never run into her altar theology anywhere except them telling me that she believed it. Okay, but they summarize it as 3 steps. They basically say, here's the altar, and she would say that here's the altar, and the altar, sanctifies the gift. And so she's using altar with a capital, obviously. She's coming from Hebrews, which is biblical. If you go to Hebrews 13, it says that he's the altar that we offer our sacrifices on, okay? But they think she's taking that scripture out of context. See, I mean, I can't even tell you guys what she believes without already going into what they criticize. Do you get what I mean? There's so many criticisms. But so she says, lay your on the altar, and that's where we get that phrase. Supposedly, it comes from her. And so let's just act like this is us laying on the altar, okay? And then she says, the altar sanctifies the gift, and so you're just supposed to, in faith, just trust that it happened, okay? And that's the 3 steps, basically. And so they get mad. They say, well, she took out something from Wesley, and this guy's trying to peel it all apart, layer by layer. He's trying to tell you, this is what she left out. She left out this. She left out that. So he says a whole bunch of additional statements. He says she took things from not just Wesley that made her. So I like this part. I like the fact that he admits that she was a big-time student of Wesley. I agree. All right. He says her first defense was the Bible, which is curious to me, because they all say that she committed eisegesis, which means you took something out of context and all she had was proof texting. Do you realize that she didn't even get out of the first years of her ministry before she already had somebody attacking her? It's not modern gurus today attacking Phoebe Palmer. She didn't even barely start doing her ministry, which was reaching thousands. They say, on just one of her books alone, on the cover, it says that there were more DSs and DSs' wives sanctified, it was presiding elders in their church, but more presiding elders were sanctified in her Tuesday meetings than in camp meetings. Do you see what I'm saying? One of the most famous stories is a man, he's a professor of moral philosophy and all this stuff. He's supposed to be this genius, okay? And he comes to her feet and he gets sanctified. So the book kind of paints it in a cool picture. This genius man is sitting there in front of her, and the whole group has to be stunned that they basically came to what appears to be nothing more than a glorified layman. You know what I mean? And she is leading him into holiness right there. And so the second thing they tell you all about her is her short way of holiness, and you'll hear that a lot. short way to holiness. And what she means by that is a question, okay, for them. They don't think she means the same thing I do. I think she's just trying to get people who aren't sanctified sanctified. I think that's all it is. I think she believes, like we do today, that most people are rustling in the wilderness and they think they're going to grow into it. And she knows that's not going to happen. And so she has tried to make it simple. And her approach is to tell you that. When Brad first moved here, Brad's he's from Michigan. But when Christy, his wife, went to school, they went down to Florida. And so that was where he got sanctified. So he would call me every day and basically say, I'm a knucklehead, knucklehead. He wouldn't know he was saying that to me, but I knew where he was. And so I know you're a knucklehead, I know you're a knucklehead. And then finally one day he gets into A.M. Hills, and he reads Holiness and Power. And, he was wrestling, though. He knew that he was wrestling. He just didn't know what to do about it. And Holiness and Power became the cue, to help him into holiness. He read that, and he goes and he prays on his own. He's told his testimony many times here, and I've only been here twice when he did it, which is curious. But anyway, when he shares that testimony, it's true. And so Christy, it's hard for Christy. Some of you guys were not married couples yet when you were sanctified or whatever happened, you know what I'm saying? Maybe that's easier. That's why I suggest to everybody, sanctified, the only way to get married. A lot of people think that marriage is unequally yoked is sinner versus, saint. That's where people draw that line. Well, I don't think so. Mendel Taylor didn't either. I think it's, my mom, I'm not sure she would agree with that either. I think she would probably be in this camp. We've talked about it a few times. I'm not sure. But she would say, I think she would agree that you need to be sanctified. Both you need to be sanctified because it just makes marriage doable. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, it's not. Well, so what was hard for Christy is, to me, from my view, and I don't know Christy as well as I knew Brad. I grew up with Brad more. He wasn't always, he's a little younger than me. But I grew up more close to Brad. But Christy, her experience, I remember I was out in Indian Lake, which is 20 minutes from here, and they were going to get married way over where she lives, up in Flint area, somewhere up there, at a Wesleyan church. And you know me. I mean, I'm the guy that leaves my keys on top of the car and it freezes and then I don't know where my keys are. I mean, all kinds of stupid stuff. I've left my keys out on the back porch at my house and just to show how safe our neighborhood is all night. No, that wasn't why. It was just because, me. So anyway, so all of a sudden I'm out there and it just dawns on me. This is the day my friend's getting married and I'm here in Indian Lake like an idiot. So I get in the car and we hit like 90. I mean, it was sanctified 90, but we were trying to get there. We were trying to get there on time for their wedding. And I come in, that's where I met Christy. You see what I mean? And so, and she probably doesn't remember the details, but from like this, But this is her church. This is her minister, and he basically says, Christy, 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 Christy. He doesn't know Brad as much, And she's a great this and a great that. And she's going to be a doctor. Blah 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 blah. All right. And then Brad was kind of like, they just didn't do much about his side of things, And so they get married, and that was where I met her. I mean, basically, so I'm kind of raced up to where they're at, And so Brad would kind of come in and come out. They were in Spring Arbor at the time area, and they would come over here every once in a while, and I would see Brad. But then they had to take off for her schooling, and they went down to Florida. And so when he got sanctified, I mean, guys, it was kind of hard for me because I had dealt with him so many different times, not personally at an altar. But I had called him and talked with him hour upon hour upon hour, trying to help him get sanctified. And I didn't know where he was. Do you get what I'm saying? It was hard to get openness. Who's going to just open up completely on a phone, And so he would tell me some things, but I didn't exactly know. But anyway, so he goes alone. He gets A.M. Hills in Power, Holiness and Power, and it tells him how to get sanctified. He prays because he really wanted it. And so he gets sanctified. And my whole point I'm trying to share with you is that Christy was the goody two-shoe. She was the, for her light, what she knew, do you see what I'm saying? She was doing really, really well. And because she didn't hear all this. And he grew up under all this. Do you see what I mean? And so she was walking like she knew. She was a Christian in that sense. She was keeping her, devotional life to a good degree for a carnal Christian. You see what I'm saying? She was doing so well. And so when they got married, they had a few bumpy months. I'll just sum that, bumpy, probably because she kind of found out most wives find that out anyway, even sanctified. You're not, you know, Incredible Hulk. I mean, you got holes in you, and it doesn't take long to figure that out. But anyway, so they had a little bit of bumpiness, but it wasn't anything really bad. But it was just bumpiness, and I think it was basically running into the wall of selfish sides of both of each other. And but God had more grace on her because she didn't know, and He knew. You see what I'm saying? And I'm drilling him, but he never experientially knew. And so that day was so freeing. He gets radically sanctified. All right. But I have a hard time just going, yeah, you're sanctified, especially on the phone. Okay. I take your word for it this time. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, I got to go there and see it. And it wasn't long, though, that Brad had started to do really cool things. He started to influence the church down there towards prayer. I mean, there's fruit. Do you see what I mean? Brad's always been a winsome person. But he had an older preacher who was basically on his way out. I mean, he must have been upwards of 60s plus. Very experienced in the church, and Brad had wrapped him around his little finger. He was very curious about Brad. He could tell Brad was on fire, and so and he started to give me all those great proofs. Brad, I'm talking about you both. I'm talking about your sanctification experience a little bit, and Christy, you too. But Brad, really had impacted this pastor, and I heard about it. He was saying things like, "Ben, I'm going to be teaching here," and see, previous to that, he had a little experience at Chapman, which nobody really emphasizes. Back when he was carnal, he kept telling me. See, he had kind of some of the story I started with. He had a call. He knew that before he knew he was sanctified. Okay. I also think he got praying a bit before he got sanctified. Okay. He always wanted to help his own family. He had, big heart and stuff like that. So he was at Chapman for a short while, which is a church near here, and he had been their Sunday school teacher. But he didn't have this kind of impact. You see the difference? He was sending me all the exact proofs I needed on the phone every time he'd call me after that he had really changed. So what happened was he was in that church, and he had that pastor wrapped around his finger. I mean, the guy is acting like Brad's his associate. He has no training yet, and on and on it goes, but he just has a warm heart to Brad, which is cool. Do you see what I'm saying? And he feels like he needs to mentor him, and he's trying to give him open doors, and he's letting him preach a bit. And so, but still, I wanted a face-to-face encounter with the new Brad. I wanted to know. And so my mom holds a meeting down, or maybe it was us. I don't remember which one it was. It was my mom. Okay, we were both holding a meeting down in Florida. And so yes, I don't remember. Yeah, we came. Okay, so it was my mom. That's what I would assume. But anyway, so we come down there, and I don't remember where we went. We went to a restaurant. Maybe it was Applebee's or something. Okay. All right, help me out. So what restaurant were we at when I first got to test when you were sanctified? When you sat down in front of me and talked to me? See, isn't that cool? So he has such an influence that he has this 60-plus-year-old about to oust himself out of the church, retire, pastor. He sees such an impact in Brad, and I think he saw prayer. There's quite a few obvious things, that Brad's emphasizing. One of them that was so we get down there. Yeah, Ruby Tuesday. I sit in front of him, and I want to test him. I basically want him to, let me have it. Prove to me you're sanctified. You know what I mean? And he goes in on one of his sermon ideas because that's what he was doing. He was doing some kind of, would you call them sermons? Bible teachings. I'm not exactly sure, but it was a Sunday school or some kind of class or something. Yeah, youth. Is that what it was? So he starts pulling out, and was it? I don't know if it was your David and Goliath one or what sermon it was. Well, before he goes on, I wish you could have seen his face. I mean, I had known Brad for years and years and years, and he was, popular with everybody, more than me, and it was kind of hard for me as this kind of this nerdy whatever I was. I don't know what I was, like a mixture basketball player nerd that would every once in a while pop into his life. Personally, it was hard for me to connect deep, but the curiosity of it all was I had a friend who was closer, who is Dylan's relative. That's his uncle. He was my best friend, Chad, growing up, and I had graduated from high school. This is prior to all this, obviously. And you know how, I don't know if Indian Lake does this anymore, but they used to say, if you're a senior, you can stay back one more year, even though you've graduated, gone. You don't need to be here anymore. You can come back one more year for camp, for senior high camp. And I wasn't going to do that. The last thing I wanted to do was go there. But when Chad showed up and he wasn't sanctified, do you see what I mean? He looked like he fell in the tackle box. He was tan as can be. He was doing ab crunches every day, wanted everybody staring at him. You know what I mean? It was just me, 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 me. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to stay for this guy. I'm going to try to help him out. And it was tough because this guy was like, anyway, some people would call him a babe magnet and everything else. I mean, just coming to our door, waiting for him in line. Everybody's hoping that he would break somebody's heart, and it was terrible. I mean, the guys were so jealous of him that they, it was horrible. Being around that. Okay, but I was trying to witness to him. Well, one night I'm laying into him as hard as can be about holiness, and I didn't even know Brad was there. And Brad starts popping into the conversation, and he starts getting hungry. And before long, it was weird because I knew Chad was supposed to stay at my house that night. Somehow Brad ended up at my house that night. It's like see what I mean? He had like this hunger for years. Do you see what I'm saying? And he would show up, and he'd hear me lambaste him all night long about holiness. And so Brad had a hunger. He wanted to be there, And so what? Yeah, oh yeah. But I'm telling you, and that he went through a private, personal, hard experience. It didn't have to do with him, but he came in on a very scary, horrible situation. And it would have hurt anybody his age, and it really shook him up. And he came to me after that. See what I mean? And he said, Ben, I don't know what happened, and I'm afraid that this person's future, and on it goes. And I tried to answer him. I'm young, it was tough to answer. And I said, I don't know all the answers, but I said, let's pray. And I tried to pray with him, and that shook him up for a while, but didn't get him there, And so what I'm trying to get across is if you could just seen his face, all those years, there's this cool guy on the surface, but deep down within, I could just see it. I could see right in his eyes. I could see pain. Do you see what I mean? Always. There's always this question and pain. And so when I'm sitting in front of him and he's starting to go off about the Bible, God's just is that the word exuding? Or how do you say that? It's just coming out of him, And I used to one of my tests in Olivet was to look at my hair on my arm. Mom does it often, but I just watched my hair just, stand right up on edge. And I'm telling you, both arms, it's like, right, I'm testing him with the radar, you know what I mean? Come on, Brad, you guys show me something. And he is, he's just, oh, man, the 5 points, and he can't shut up. He could always not shut up about sports or something else. But to be so Bible, 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 he's just going on and on and on, all right? And what was really cool was by then he had established himself in prayer, like what you're talking about, So I'd be like, man, what do you do? You know what I mean? Because she was at school, she was going to a very serious school, and he had to figure out what he was going to do during the day to get prepared for his ministry whenever things went that direction. And he didn't know all the answers, but he would sit there at home, and he had organized himself in a way. So he had his holiness books, and he would read. Do you see what I'm saying? He just cut himself off from everything else, and he started praying. And so now I wanted some more. I wanted proof. Okay, what's your prayer life doing? I believed that he was changed from that first conversation at that restaurant, but I wanted to really know if it was just his new prayer life. I wanted to know if he was really there. And so he starts saying, Ben, you wouldn't believe it, He said, I had, before when I wasn't totally surrendered to God, I'd gone to Olivet for a little bit, and I owed them money, And he said, but somehow, I'm paying here and there little things or whatever. They made a mistake right when he was praying, right when he was fasting. And they paid him. Now, guys, I've heard of college students paying colleges. I've never heard of a college paying a college student back. okay? And they're giving him $800. I think that's what it was. I said, man, you need to take the receipt of that and put it in your house and put it in a box, like, like a window, like a trophy. Put it in a trophy case, and put that in your house and a nan and a boo-boo to, the enemy for everything he's ever tried to do to you. But what was so cool was God started turning the tide, you know. It was hard 'cause I don't know a lot about Christy. And I'm trying to interpret her from my view, so I'm going to do it the best I can. But Christy came to one of our meetings too, and she was really friendly, and we ate out and all that stuff with my mom and everything. And I knew she was hungry too, but I didn't know where she was, and I didn't know all the ins and outs. And Brad's very polite about Christy. He always holds her in high respect and high regard. Do you get what I'm saying? He's not gonna. I think he his love song would be something like "You fell out of heaven," and right here you are. I mean, she's a little lower than the angels too, but just but something like that. And so he had a hard time. I mean, I think that's what love does, by the way. I think it kind of confuses you about where they're at because you love them so much. And I'm kind of an outsider. I'm a grumpy old man, I mean, not exactly that, but I'm getting there. And but anyway, so I'm watching them, and they're a neat couple and everything, and he likes to tell me their stories. But she was wrestling too. She started wrestling about. I don't know all the things. I think there's two of them that were highlighted over months of time. Was people pleasing in a sense, kind of, or whatever way you probably not that word, but maybe like fear of man or something. I don't know exactly how you say it. And then financial things, like just the concern, maybe the over-influence of worry about money, not, and I don't mean like she was doing that, but you know what I'm saying, when you just feel reserve in certain areas of your Christian life, and it's not easy for you, okay? And so one thing I started doing, just like we all do, is come to waiting school. And back then, man, waiting school cost, to come to waiting school, how much was it at that time? Do you guys remember? Ouch. Yeah. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, we're talking about a big building, and you got to pay, and you got all your meals, and I mean, you get a nice little deal, but I mean, ouch. And so it was hard for them. I mean, they're just married, and she's at school, and he's got bills and all this, and so how are they going to come to waiting school, And finally, God starts doing some things that direction, which was the pastors starting open their churches for a waiting school, which is crazy. I mean, we had one in California, and I can't remember all the places, Ohio, and then we had one in Florida. And so we're hoping for this, just like today, we're hoping for this breakout, this huge spiritual thing. And I remember we even went down there and looked with it might have been your dad. I think he drove us around to show us possibilities of places where God could do things. I don't remember. I know we went and saw facilities, and he might have been the one that was doing it. I don't remember. But we had to go hold a waiting school at a church in Florida. And so now they could come. You see what I mean? And I was really thrilled by then because I knew where he was. Do you see what I'm saying? And another guy came in at the same time. So I think God did this. And it's kind of nice just so you won't get bored when you get sanctified, okay? When you get a little older in sanctification. Because I had gone a while in evangelism. And I'd been out there all those years with my wife. And we not to be, if Mike were in here, he's probably doing something for the ministry for the church. But if he was in here, one of the things I would say is it's hard to want to go out to those revivals anymore because you're running into a wall. These people have changed. 20 years ago, they were warm to the Holy Spirit. Now you're just running into a wall. And it's hard. It's hard to want to get out there and face that, especially as a young minister. And so I remember sitting kind of in this period of time. And we were in Pastor Elliott. He used to be the pastor of this church. And he's up north Michigan at the time. And I was in his house, and we were between preaching events. And I got alone with God, and I said, Lord, Mom has all this fruit. Do you see what I'm saying? I want to know that somebody got it. I want to know they stuck with it. I want to know somebody's changed. I'm telling you this. Do you see what I'm saying? I want to know. And Brad comes out of the woodwork, And so I have this. I mean, guys, I don't know if you've had that experience, but one of the most exciting things in the world is to have a disciple, who will follow you around. Because I'm telling you, Ben, you didn't read your Bible today. Oh, okay. Ben, are you going to church? See what I mean? And especially when they're sanctified. He'll call me every minute. Ben, I'm absolutely in love with Jesus. Oh, I know you're coming to church today to argue for the name of the church because we're going to stay holy in this church. You see what I mean? It's so cool to have somebody putting you in check 24 hours a day. Well, all of a sudden, I got another one from Florida, right in the same period of time. And unfortunately, this is a sad story because the guy's gone away from it now. All right, but he was a prisoner and he had 60 years he was going to be facing in prison. And a pastor who had married my brother and his wife over in Virginia had gone down there to be a pastor, and then a pastor from Michigan that Mom had held revival for, who taught us about Revival Hymn, that cool CD. You guys need to watch that; it's really powerful, impacting. He and his wife moved down to Florida, so now we're like, oh boy, you know what I mean? We got we got some people on our side down there. This is gonna be, you know what I mean? And so this guy is in the prison, and he's supposed to have 60 years, and the pastor Peter, who's Sarah's growing up pastor, Pastor Sarah's growing up pastor, he goes in there in a prison ministry and he's preaching to him, you know, and he meets him. And I don't know his impact. I think he discipled him, I would say, you know. I think by then Raph had already, his name is Raffaello, but we called him Raph. Some people called him Raph, you know, whatever you want to call him. He was really cool because he had been in drugs, he had been a thief, he had done all these horrible things, and somebody snitched on him. And so he was in prison for 60 years, you know. And while he was in there, he got converted. He was reading the book of Revelation, and it scared him to death, you know. And so he gets saved. And so right in that period of time, he starts to try to witness to everybody in the prison. And so, if you kind of wonder about the influence of why we do, I honestly think why we do night after night after night, even though the Spirit led us to that, it was Raf's idea. For the moment he got here, Ben, when we were in prison, he wanted everything to be just like it was that he had set up. You see what I mean? We have church every single day. I mean, I don't know what to do out here. We do it one day a week, you know. So he was struggling with that. And, but so I'm telling you, though, it was the strangest thing I ever met, because when I met him, he was humble, okay? And I come in, I'm holding a revival for this man down in Florida, and Ralph is sitting there in the service, and he's got that big smile, big contagious smile, you know. And he looked like he knew something I didn't know. It was one of those irritating things. I come every night and I'm preaching. I remember my back was hurting. I played basketball too much, and my back was hurting. And so, but I would sit up there in front of him, and he's just got this smile on his face, and he would come up in the choir, and he was just, I'm watching this guy move around the sanctuary, and he's just knows something I don't know, and what is it, you know? And Pastor finally tells me, you know, at the end of the meeting, he says, "You have a big fan." And I'm like, "What?" You know, because I'm this nobody evangelist, this young guy. I'm like, "What?" You know, and he goes, "Yeah, this." He goes, "This is Ralph," and Ralph's like, "Hi," you know, and he's like, and he says, "Man, I've been," you know, it was almost like he was waiting for that moment, you know. And he invites me to his house, and we hung out with him that night, and I met his kids and everything. And they hadn't got married yet, blah, blah, blah. See what I mean? So there's some spiritual issues that need to be dealt with. And he came to the altar one of the nights, and he said, "Ben, you know, when I was in prison, I really got on fire for God." He said, "I got saved," and he said, "I really found sanctification. I don't know how. I don't remember that part. I wish I could remember it." And he said, "But I started getting into the cool writings, Phoebe Palmer." And I'm like, "Dude, you're in prison and you learned holiness better than our students?" This is what I was saying. This became my new holiness description everywhere we went. I was like, "You're in prison and you know holiness better than the Nazarene students that I've been hanging out with for the last 20 years. How in the world did that happen?" You know, he learned how to cook while he was in prison. On it goes. God really blessed him, okay? But he was released. And when he got released down in Florida, it wasn't long before bad stuff came back up. And do you see what I'm saying? And he backslid. And so he came to the altar and he said, "Man, I don't think I can get right." He said, "Where I was so close to God." He knew it. You know what I mean? He had that kind of deep knowledge that Christians have. And I was just like, man. And he said, "I really feel I'm probably, you know, that Hebrews 10 case. I don't think I can get back, you know." And I said to him, "Well, I think you can." You know, in the middle of that meeting, I said, "I really do. I don't usually do that. But I said, I really think because the way you're showing such conviction and such draw, you know, from God, that you can get right." And what was really cool about him, he had a side to him where he could just like David, you know, there seems to be almost like two spiritual types. There's a group, and I think me and Brad are in that group, where we're like, "Oh, I just broke a pencil," or "I stepped on a bug, you know, I must not be spiritual anymore," you know. There's that extreme. And then there's the other side, which is just, I never check. I'm right with God, okay, I'm good. You know what I mean? And that's David versus Saul type, okay? David is, I'm good, you know, and doesn't check until he's in trouble, okay? And the other side is the Saul type, which checks every minute. Am I okay? Oh, you know, see what I mean? And that was Saul, okay? Both extremes can lead you to trouble, all right? But he did get up, and he just changed. I'm for Christ again. Oh, yeah. You see what I mean? Guys, now I got two of them. I mean, I almost picture them like earmuffs, just on my big old head. I mean, it's just like, hey, Ben, you talking about holiness? Hey, Ben, are you witnessing like I'm witnessing? Have you seen what I'm seeing? Are you, I mean, everywhere I went, it was like this. And so I'm trying to tell this little church before we had all this going on here. We got two firecrackers coming here, two sons of thunder. That's what we're going to call them. They're coming here, and you better watch out. And I remember Sarah was nervous about it. Pastor Sarah was like, what do we do about them? I remember she gave me a phone call in there, like, this is what they need to do. You need to put one over here, one in this situation. I mean, she didn't, this is hard. But I loved it, man. I was like, this is insane. And that was God's answer to me. Do you see what I mean? He was saying, there's your fruit, okay? And I was like, this is insane. And so we tried to nurture, we tried to help, but, the devil tried to do things. Pastor Chris is a good ingredient. So is my mom in this case scenario. This church had some people that were attending it from the last pastor, and they weren't saved. And they were very involved, and, this church was cold. There's a spiritual coldness over this place. And Pastor Chris came in and ministered, and it disrupted, and it drew some people, but real things were happening. And so one day, I don't even know if I was here that day, but I heard the news that Pastor Chris had to come and tell them all. If either get right or get out of here. You need to either get right or you're not going to stay here and just cause trouble anymore. And so a big group walked out. You see what I mean? And Pastor Chris, so he has some guts, and he's had to. By the way, that's one of his characteristics over his life. He stood in front of the football team at Olivet and told them all they weren't as good as they thought they were, and he almost got killed. Chris will tell you what you need to hear, whether you want to hear it or not. Okay? And I've always stood there in the shadow and watched him do that. I'm always the little skinny guy standing behind him, waiting for everybody to beat me up. I'm going to help Chris. Whatever. I'll come at him as hard as I can and get knocked out before I even know what's going on. But Chris would just stand there like a beast, and he would tell people. And so he did. And then mom was out and traveling too, and she would come here. And, Amanda and I held a small revival here with the littler church when Elliot was here and stuff like that. So we didn't see too much yet, but there's some people still to this day here, Marzell and Chris and Carolyn, that were here during that meeting. You know what I mean? And the pastor came actually to Mom's meeting, and that's how he heard about me and Amanda. And it was the first teaching I ever did in one of these kind of conferences. It wasn't waiting school, but we used to have what we called the prayer warrior retreat. That's where Chad would come. Oh man, we had some fun memories of Chad. One night, I'm sitting there. We had to out at the campgrounds. This is fun too, but anyway, where am I for time? Because I don't want to get you guys in trouble. 10 minutes. All right. So we're sitting out at the campgrounds, and at the campgrounds, we had to stay in what's called the greenery, or Brad, what's the upper part? It had a name for it, the conference center or something. Yeah, conference center. So Mom would always rent that out, and she had all the keys to the rooms. And so sometimes the teen guys, like we get our own room, you know what I mean? And so we're in there talking and joking. And Chad, even during Jeremy's wedding, me and Chad had Jeremy laughing so hard that he almost died laughing. You know what I mean? Like, we come out, and the father was kind of stiff and everything, and I got little wings that I found in the back of the church on my head. And we just walk out there like idiots. We always had each other laughing. Well, one night, Chad is sitting there face to face like this, because we had to stay in these campgrounds rooms, and so picture a big beast. That's what was so funny. We have Jeremy and me. We're up here, and Chad's down here, and he's the leader of the pack, so we're following him around. Well, anyway, Chad's laying right here in my face, and all of a sudden he just coughs in the middle of the night. I'll never forget. He's just like, and I'm like, and I'm, me. My brain's half with it. I'm like, you just coughed in my face like that. I must have said it just like that, and I'm like, you be all right. And I went right to bed. I just fell right to sleep. This is stupid memories. But anyway, so anyway, that doesn't matter. I wanted you to hear these things. But anyway, so I'm just trying to say, back on the real thing, Brad, not Chad. Brad was on fire. And he had talked this pastor into holding Mom for revival. He wanted prayer teaching there. He had me come. And so it was so cool. And I remember sitting in their house, and I could feel God's presence. They wouldn't call it a house. What would you say that was at that time? It was like an apartment or something? Yeah, it was so small. But I could just feel God. And I could feel being around them both. And anyway, when Christy got to waiting school, what one was that? Was that 21? 20? 21? So they finally got to be at one at 21. I'm bragging them all over the country, and they finally get to be at one, right? And Christy comes in, and God does his thing. There's a lot of people there. It's kind of a big deal, and Mom's doing her ministry, and I'm doing the ministry here and there. And Christy felt, that God was drawing her to get sanctified. And she went up, and she kind of has a quiet way of not being noticed. That's kind of how she is. She doesn't, hey, it's me. I'm going up, and I'm so cool. She just walked up the altar, and Brad and others were praying around her, and she got up, and you know who she is. You see what I'm saying? And I'm telling you, it's so cool. You know what I mean? As it keeps going, but I believe it wasn't just a result only of his being sanctified. I think it's a result of his prayer life. And Christy already had a prayer life. I already said that before you came in. But now, do you get what I mean? Now her prayer life is deep, Over the years, as I've kind of watched them, she bears a burden for workers, her co-workers, and, her family. And she will pour out her heart. You hear it a lot. And what was cool about Brad, see, God used them both to convict me in areas I needed work. You know what I mean? Brad became this dynamo prayer guy behind the scenes. He was already praying. He was so thrilled. It's weird. I mean, usually it doesn't work that way. It's kind of like the book Acts not going in order. Usually you don't get all about prayer before you get sanctified, okay? But he was getting into prayer, and he was already seeing the fruit of it, and then he gets sanctified, and then he really starts praying. And so when he gets over here, it's no different. I mean, he got around that church that he'd been, how many years had you been around Chattanooga by then, before you came back? 14, 15, I don't know how long it was. He had been there a long time. Yeah, his youngest years. But he had quite a few years around that church, and they knew him. And when he came back, he was like, the pastor was all over him, just like he was in Florida. Brad, blah, 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 blah. And what was so cool was Brad was winning people left and right. He wouldn't stop. Because, friends and relatives that weren't right with God, real serious cases, and they were coming around church because of Brad. It kept going and going and going. His whole family came here pretty soon. They were in the services. And I loved it all. You know what I mean? Brought him to waiting school, And so just let me end it on this. One night, similar to this type setting, I was supposed to, I think it was preach it might have been at waiting school in Florida. I don't remember which one it was. But they got there, both Ralph and Brad got there on, pretty early. And they decided that night that they were going to pray for me through the night. And so they did. You know what I mean? And by the time I got up, you know what I mean? Have you ever had somebody pray for you all night long before you preach? I mean, one time it happened to me before that. I was in that revival I was telling you about over in Michigan where Pastor Elliott was. And he and his favorite guy in the church decided they're going to stay up all night and pray for us through the night. And when it happened, it was so awesome. I came in, I'm telling you guys, I've had a few experiences like this, but it was so dynamic that I almost felt like I could stick my hand out and feel God. Do you get what I'm saying? I mean, people came in. It's a store church. If you want to call it a church, you can call it a church. If you want to call it a store, you can call it a store. We're in that building. And these people come in on Sunday morning just to have a little special Sunday morning service and leave. And wham. I mean, it's just like God's just boom, you know what I mean? Just blasting them away. And I could tell. I could feel it. You know what I mean? And it was very similar, Anyways, but I just wanted you to see that God used Phoebe Palmer, to win one of those guys into holiness. And the American Holiness Movement, which is really the fruit of her ministry, Brad was won to holiness from reading one of their books. Do you see what I'm saying? And he led others into it. Mike he'll say it himself, Mike, her husband. Brad, he said, if it wasn't for Brad, I wouldn't be sanctified. He's an evangelist in the church now. And Maquette will say it too. She's very proud of it. But you get what I'm saying, guys? It's cool to see God use you. And he doesn't just pick my mom. Don't worry, I use that argument all the time. My mom is the special dynamo. I'll never be anything like that. God will use her. It was crazy with Chad, because years ago when he had hardened up a bit, he had gone to Arizona, and this is his high school age. He came back to our camps in our area, and my mom was up there preaching, and she felt led, which she doesn't do very often, that she needed to go right to him. And that's old school. I mean, you don't do that anymore. I mean, hi, I'm brand new to you, but I'm going to come right over and. Now, she wasn't brand new to him, but in the old school day, they'd come right over to you and say, hey, you need to go to the altar, and they grab you by the hand and take you up there. She did that with him, and that was kind of that's a scary moment, you know what I mean? But he got radical. So anyway, let's pray. Father, I thank you. I know that Phoebe has been taken over and everybody's told us that she's a postmillennialist. His book here, the reason I brought it out today was because she wasn't. It says that she was waiting for your return as an older person all through her older years. She even tried to claim a date. She wondered when it was going to happen, and she wasn't right. She had come off the Wesley's and Fletcher's interpretations, and she thought it would be right, and it wasn't. And but she said, still keep the next year. She said, opening up the Guide to Holiness, she said, keep expecting. He's going to come. She was clearly in our view. And Lord, I love that. I love that, Brad and I were right. That was an instinct. We wondered. We've had some studies about that. Lord, I thank you for the years that you've given me around these people. One of the more special experiences I had where I felt God's presence like that was at Lee's camp. Lee and Roseanne, they had a camp by their church, and they held us for a meeting, and I could tell they prayed. I remember listening to them pray prior to the services, and that was when I was most impressed with them. I had never heard them pray, and I was so impressed with them. And then the atmosphere was just like I just described. When we got in there, it felt I could feel God, almost like put my hand out and touch God. And Lord, I pray that all of us would be that dynamite. We wouldn't fear it. And Lord, it's okay to test and find out where somebody is. And Lord, I'm thankful for their experience. I'm thankful for how victorious they are. And I pray that you keep all of us in that, all the new ones that committed to it. Help them to stick with it and bless this service, Lord, the rest of this day. I think we're going to probably do communion. Maybe not. But we're doing quite a few things, Lord, that just seal the deal. And I just pray it would be that important this morning to everybody. In Jesus' name, amen.